hope you're all well. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Scotland, the story so far, a panel where we're going to be exploring the cultures of hip hop and grime in Scotland. I'm Arusa Qureshi, and I'm a writer and editor based in Edinburgh. I'm on the board of the Scottish Music Centre and in the Scottish Music Industry Association's advisory group. And I'm currently writing a book about women in hip hop called Flip the Script, which is out later this year via 404 Inc. I'm really pleased to be hosting this panel with three wonderful guests who all come with different experiences and perspectives on Scotland's hip hop scene. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Darren, Shahida, and Ransom FA. So first up, got Darren McGarvey, who goes by the stage name Loki. He's a rapper, author, and social commentator, and his 2018 book Poverty Safari was the winner of the Orwell Prize. His writing has appeared in all kinds of places, including Scotsman, Guardian, The Independent, and more. Shahida Sinclair, also known as Nova, is a singer, rapper, producer, and DJ. Her debut EP, Re-Up, was the winner of the 2020 Scottish Album of the Year award, and she's been featured in places like Clash, Enemy, Mixmag, and more. Ransom FA is a fast-rising grime MC from Aberdeen who boosted his reputation by appearing on BBC Three's The Rap Game. He's already shared the stage with people like Skepta, Wiley, and Mist, and he's a presenter on BBC Three's new documentary series, The Rap Trip. So, hello, lovely panel, and thanks so much for joining me today. So I'm going to start by just saying that, of course, hip hop means different things to different people, but I guess we can probably all agree that hip hop is art and it's poetry, and it can also be activism and defiance. And as a genre of music that started in the Bronx in the 70s, it's traveled the world and it's morphed, and rappers all over the world have transplanted this genre into really distinct and like localized contexts. And of course, Scotland's connection to hip hop goes way back, and there have been key voices involved from the very beginning. And today, I'm sure you'll agree that the scene is really healthy and it's still growing all the time. So as I said before, everyone on this panel has got different experiences and will have their own journeys when it comes to Scottish hip hop. But I want to start by asking you all a bit more generally how you first came to discover hip hop and became interested in it. And was there an artist or a particular track that led you there and encouraged you to have a go? So maybe start with Darren, if that's cool.
Certainly. Thank you. It's good to be with you all. I mean, for me, hip hop, my journey into hip hop began pretty early. It was being beamed into my home in Pollock in the 90s through MTV and MTV Base, when you still had music videos on television. And so this music was resonating with me initially just because of the rhythm of it. But then when I started exploring the rap side of it, despite the obvious differences in the experiences of the predominantly African-American artists that I was listening to and my own experience, there were similar themes. The themes of social marginalization, the themes of poverty, the antagonistic attitudes towards the police and authorities. And so my friends and I, we began investigating this music, going into town, buying CDs. But for me, it was really, and people who follow my music will know this, it was really when the Slim Shady LP dropped in 1999, when I started to realize not only how into rapping I was, but I started to see that there was a place for me to explore the aspects of my story which I hadn't really heard reflected, which were the family dysfunction, the alcoholism in the home, and things of that nature. And really after that, I just kind of hit the ground running. I thought I was the only rapper in Scotland. I subsequently learned I was part of an illustrious community, a very kind of complex weft of different eras and phases and styles. And so for me, hip hop primarily is community.
Thanks so much. And we'll come back to talk about the community aspect of that in a bit. I'll come to Shahida next, if that's cool.
Yeah, so I think my involvement in hip hop started with my family. Like my parents, when they were kind of younger, they were part of a community that came together. That was kind of when hip hop kind of was arriving in the UK, I think. So yeah, they kind of, kept in touch with that. I remember when I was young, my dad, he was a graffiti artist, and then he would do like workshops with young people and children to make money and stuff. And I remember being like going along with him to those workshops. So, you know, like graffiti is like a big part of hip hop culture. And my dad would listen to tapes in the car and stuff like that. So, yeah, when I was growing up and like becoming a teenager and all that kind of stuff, I just kind of naturally gravitated towards other people that were like, you know, fans of hip hop or kind of already making music. So, yeah. And yeah, it was like when I was in school, we would have a half day on a Friday in high school, and me and my friends, we would like gather together and, you know, go and smoke and just listen to rap music. So that was kind of the beginning, yeah, for me.
I definitely feel you in terms of gravitating towards it as a teen, because I think a lot of people will, as a teen, gravitate towards it. Ransom, how about you?
For me, it's kind of like I've had a mixed journey. I've had two legs because I fell in love with hip hop and grime like at the same time. Like I remember my brother, he was 3 or 4 years older than me, and he was obsessed with it. So like it was within my family. Like I was like a young loon cutting about, and I would hear him blaring these banging tunes, and I was like, oh, what's that? Like always feeding off what he was listening to, and as well as see my brother and my family being obsessed with it, I fell in love with the expression of hip hop. The fact that like no matter where you are, who you are, you can relate to the pain or the story or the something that's being expressed in the music in the lyrical form that is hip hop. And then at the same time, when I was falling in love with hip hop, so I loved Lil Wayne, Outkast. They were one of my favorites to this day. I got that CD. That was my first CD, and that made me fall in love with hip hop. I fell in love with grime because grime was in its early stages. So I was like listening to like, these are the days when you had like LimeWire. So like we were downloading all these tracks illegally. Obviously, I do not condone that, but like we were just getting everything that we could and just getting our hands on all the music that we can. Even Bearshare, I remember Bearshare back in the day. So kind of like I fell in love with the two elements of hip hop and grime at the same time, because obviously hip hop, there's a lot of expression, there's a lot of storytelling, whereas grime felt so close to home because it was like, even though it was in England, we could still kind of relate to these young kids going through similar things that we were going through. So yeah, that's kind of how I fell in love with it.
Thanks for sharing that, and thank you all for telling us about how you started. Obviously, you've all had different kind of careers so far in hip hop, and I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about your journey so far, I guess, in Scottish hip hop, and what have been some highlights or some difficulties or frustrations that you faced. And maybe start with Shada this time.
Okay. Yeah, so I think my involvement in music, it started with I was doing events in Glasgow and I was like 19, 20, and we were doing events looking for people to like perform at the events because we had like an art collector going on and all this kind of stuff. Wanted to raise money, and I got in touch with this rapper, this really cool Nigerian rapper, because I wanted him to perform. And through meeting him, he ended up asking me to manage him. So I kind of got involved with like music business to begin with, I guess. And then yeah, that didn't end up working out, but through him I met other artists, other rappers and stuff. And then I met this guy and ended up writing my first like song that I actually released. So I recorded it in the living room, and you know, it's very rough and ready. And then after that, I just kept on wanting to, you know, continue. So, you know, it was tough, but there's been a lot of hurdles, there's been a lot of ups and downs, a roller coaster and stuff like that. I kind of started rapping as a duo kind of thing as well. But at that time, I knew that I didn't want us to be a duo, like a group. I wanted us to be two solo artists coming together kind of thing. So after I'd done a project with the duo, I decided to, you know, see what it was going to be like by myself. And that's when I released the album. And then, yeah, fast forward to last year, in October, I ended up, just magically winning the SAY Award 2020. And then, I got a lot of opportunities through that. And during lockdown as well, like obviously everyone was tested like creatively. and I was at college at the time doing sound production. So I kind of pushed myself to be able to still make music, even though I couldn't meet other people, go to a studio or anything. So I ended up experimenting with different styles because I was, but I was by myself. I didn't have like the nerves of like being with other people in an unfamiliar place. So I ended up moving into like more singing stuff. I definitely see myself as an alternative artist. So yeah, just keep on experimenting with different styles and stuff.
Thanks for that. And Darren, how about you? What have been your kind of highlights and difficulties, frustrations so far being involved in Scottish hip hop?
Well, first, it's fascinating just hearing other people's experiences, because I think, as an aside from my specific experience, whatever era we come up in, or whatever the norms are at that time, that often, unless we're exposed to other experiences, we feel that is the definitive era and that is the definitive experience, and everything else is kind of pre that era or post, and I think a lot of us feel that we exist in the real golden age of Scottish hip hop. There are five different distinct phases of this, and each of them can be delineated in specific ways, but they all fit together as a perfect whole so far. And I think for me, I mean, one of the joys of my journey through this, I wouldn't necessarily call what I have done a career. It becomes a career up at a certain point. And I certainly was, one of the few artists who was able to diversify in terms of what I was bringing to the table, and recognition that, even artists who make a lot of money from their music, even artists who are commercially successful, they can't sustain a lifestyle without diversifying in some way. Because why are rappers who've got #1 hits still touring the world all the time? Why are they doing trainer deals? Why are they doing deals for this, that, and the third? So there has to come a point where you diversify, and really that was a big positive experience for me, because when I came into hip hop, all I wanted to do was rap. I was part of a phase that was very, very cultural. It didn't have many professional avenues, professional outlets. The internet was still in its infancy. I didn't have regular access to the internet until I was in my mid-20s. So I made my name by recording stuff on a CD, and then the CDs just became part of a local myth. They were getting copied and handed out. People acquired the music, or you would put some in places like FOP, and every other weekend I would go to FOP and maybe make 50, 60 quid from CDs that people were buying. So this was a big positive thing. It gave me a focal point in the chaos of my life at that time. I was homeless. I was on alcohol and drugs. It was a difficult period. And so this gave me something really to obsess about and to really kind of have a goal in mind. And in terms of the negative aspects of it, and this is one of the things that I think marks this new generation out from our generation in a way that I really find quite commendable, is that when I was coming up, there were too many rivalries. We were too weary of each other. We were also drinking and rapping was synonymous. There was no separation of these two things. So often anything that we did manage to build together, we would dismantle it by getting too drunk and too rowdy, getting a bad reputation, but at whatever venues were supporting us, having an antagonistic attitude towards anyone who wanted to help from the outside, and generally just being a little bit too tribal and a little bit too schemy, if you know what I mean. And so what I enjoy seeing, and this is certainly an evolution of the culture, is that while there are rivalries and while hip hop will always be overtly competitive, and it should be because that is part of our culture, at the same time, to see guys up regularly ciphering with one another and creating big moments in our culture is a big step forward, because we just weren't able to get it together in terms of that understanding that the goal was longer term, and that if we could just rein our egos in a little bit, then there might be more spoils to share further down the line. And that's one of many regrets that I have, but I could fill a whole hour with the regrets, so I'll just leave it there.
That's really interesting to hear, and I definitely know what you mean in terms of the evolution of hip hop itself and the changes and rivalries and how people kind of interact. We'll come back to that for sure. Ransom, do you want to talk a bit more about your highlights?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny, going off of what Loki had said, I came from the generation where social media was the bread and butter of getting my music out there. Do you get what I mean? Like, I came from just the end of maybe CDs or like kind of a part of it where you would get your CD out and then, you know, you try and get in HMV or you try and get in all these other places. But for me, when I started, one of the biggest hurdles that I had was being a young black kid with a Scottish accent trying to enter an English-based scene. And I say English-based, but it was London-based. And I even say that with a pinch of salt because even at the time when I first started, London was trying to find its feet. Do you get what I mean? Like, London were known as the UK epicenter, but they were still struggling to be widely accepted worldwide. Like, obviously you had some of the artists, but that was like the Tinchy, Strider, Tiny Temper kind of era. So for me, it was always about being authentic and finding a way to use that authenticity and transcend that through my music and like build a platform. Because I knew, like, for me, if I'm going to use social media, that's going to be the biggest thing that I have. That's going to be my biggest tool. Being from Aberdeen, people aren't necessarily going to know me, or they aren't necessarily going to be like, okay, cool, like I respect this guy, but you know, people from Aberdeen shouldn't rap. And when I was entering, there was a few heads who had been doing it before me, like, you know, shouting them out because they've been building the scene. And I even watched them before in Aberdeen, but I always wondered, like, why are they not trying to take it to the worldwide social media? Like, try and, obviously we don't want to cater to everything that's happening in England, but in a sense, that's where the epicenter of music is going on. So it was a case of like, how can I knock on that door so that when I'm ready to open the door for all my people, they're like, oh, okay, cool. They already know about this scene that's happening in Scotland, or they know, like, oh, mate, in Scotland, they're serious. They got some serious MCs. So for me, it was kind of balancing the fact that, like, I was Scottish, but there wasn't necessarily, and even in the music scene in Scotland, I would struggle to, I couldn't even name anyone that I knew before me that was a young black Scottish MC. That was not something that I seen much of. In fact, there was maybe a few grime MCs in Glasgow that I really looked at. Like, they were called they were called Glasgow Grime at that time. And like, for me, it was always like a kind of a twist in my mind, because I was always wondering, like, how is it even possible as a young black kid? Like, a lot of the time I seen lots of kids put on fake American accents, fake London accents, because they're like, oh, nah, like, as a black kid, that's how you should be if you're doing the music thing in the UK. So it was kind of like finding a lane that would work for me. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, authenticity is key. If I want Aberdeen to get behind me, they're not going to get behind me if I'm not like representing where I'm from. So that's kind of what I seen. And then from there, I was like, I need to connect with the people in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and we need to unify our scene a little bit so it can be like, yo, these guys in Scotland are forced to be reckoned with. So that was one of my hurdles, like kind of using the accent and overcoming like the fact that people weren't used to it, like on a bigger scale yet. People in Scotland were even getting used to it at that time. But even when I started, they were trying to get used to London accents. They were like, at those times, people were like, oh, only Americans can rap. People from Britain can't rap. Now that's such a far gone theory that people don't assume that anymore. They think, oh, you got to be from England, or you got to be from, like, in fact, it was just London. Then it slowly started coming up. It went to Birmingham, then it went to Manchester. So my mind is it's inevitable that people are going to start looking for people in their own area. And some of the highlights I've had, just quickly, is the fact that, like, I managed to share the stage with some of the people that I would consider legends when I was growing up. Like, when I did this Skepta gig, I remember there were so many people from Aberdeen there. And like, for me, that was one of the first things that really changed people's mindsets to being like, oh, see, Ransom, he's just a local guy in Aberdeen trying to do music, to, wow, this guy's on stage with Skepta in the AB, the O2 in Glasgow. It's a madness, mate. And I had like the whole place chanting, "Stand free, stand." They were all just going crazy chanting. All I said was "stand," and they were all just going nuts. And I think what I loved was the fact that they could relate to me, and they're like, "Oh, he's one of our own." You get when he reps for me. I can relate to that guy. I seen him cutting about the fucking local area like every day in town. So yeah, for me, that was probably one of my highlights when I was able to transcend, and then from there, like go on to do different things. And it's like what Low-Key said, diversification is key. Like for me, I like to talk and do a lot of presenting stuff. So that's kind of how I knocked the door a little bit. I did a lot of presenting stuff for BBC Scotland, BBC Social, which then opened the door for me to go into the rap game on like BBC Three. And then I did my own TV show. And then I'm hopefully working on a few more things, because you got to keep diversifying in this age of social media that we live in, where I say that it's crazy because we live in an era where like influencers are rappers. You get what I mean? You get these guys who come out of Love Island and they're rappers now, and all the young kids are like, "Oh yeah, look at him." So then I'm like, it's crazy because rappers have to be influencers then. So it's like, it's a crazy balance, but I think it's all part of the game that we're in, and I think it's sick to see Scotland progressing as a unit.
Thanks so much for sharing, and it's great to hear about your achievements and how well you've done, and in representing Scotland especially. And I guess the word that you use, authenticity, I think is really important just in hip hop in general, and it's something that made me think of, well, when, like you said, when hip hop first kind of started developing in the UK, people used to sing in American accents because that was just the norm, and that was what you had to do to kind of be taken seriously. And I think, pretty sure it was London Posse were one of the first that actually used their own accents. Just on a side note, when I was doing some research for my book, I spoke to Cookie Crew, who are one of the first kind of female rappers in the UK, and they said that even they used to rap in an American accent because their kind of American counterparts used to make fun of them because they thought it was weird to hear anyone else rapping in anything else other than an American accent. But that's an aside. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. And actually linked to what you're saying there, I want to ask Darren and Shahida that, do you think that people down south and beyond Scotland do take Scottish hip hop seriously? And do you think that, they should be paying more attention to what's happening up here? Maybe start with Darren.
Sure. See, when we say people, we have to be clear who we're talking about. A fan of hip hop and a fan of grime will persist with the initial discomfort that they might experience hearing a new vernacular or a new dialect, because they can sense intuitively that the essential ingredients are there, and they'll be able to determine that within a few seconds of confronting a piece of material. So if you take, I've done shows with Akala, Professor Green, Low-Key, I've supported Royce da 5'9", D12, Cool Keith, all different generations of hip hop, all different artists across the country. And one of the ways that you can recognize if it's taken seriously is if you get paid to do that. Because these people don't want you supporting them if you are not a decent representation of what is happening in terms of the actual principles of hip hop or grime, whatever genre we're talking about here. So that's important. The other aspect is, in Scotland, we have a kind of confluence of the regionalisation or the centralisation of culture, i.e. the London-centric nature of media in Britain, and how this unfortunately places a premium on certain types of artistic and social presentation. And so often what Scottish artists are dealing with are those who choose to speak in their natural speaking style, is not just necessarily the prejudice that has historically existed against this urban art form, but also then you've got the British dimension of it as well, which is if you speak in that more received pronunciation, or in terms of urban art forms, you know, there's a kind of prevailing style there as well, which is very London. Then it means that you can kind of sometimes get a cue skip. So you can leapfrog multiple artists who actually are probably more talented and who might have worked harder just because of your proximity to that idealized style, which is easier to commodify, easier to sell because it's seen as universal. But it's interesting because when you think, if you parallel this with language attitudes generally in Britain, you find something that speaks a lot to the social structure in Britain. And I realise this is a bit tangential, but I think that you'll probably agree. The most prevalent speaking style in Britain is the received pronunciation BBC accent, right? Which is spoken by less than 5% of the population. Now, this speaking style is interesting because unlike every other speech style, it doesn't emerge naturally from a geographical location as part of a culture. It's a result of institutional conditioning. Now, the people who speak the received pronunciation, those people are regarded as the most cultured and most sophisticated because when they speak, they're transmitting on two frequencies. One frequency is to say what they're actually saying, and the other one is that they're kind of transmitting these affectations, these performative ways of speaking that make us assume that they're trustworthy, that they're intelligent, and that they deserve to be in a position of authority. So the interesting thing is that they're also assumed, therefore, to be the best communicators. But actually, they've got the whole country contorting itself to change how it speaks so that, that we can all be understood by that 5% of people who are regarded as the best communicators. And so actually, what that reveals is that often this universal style that we're all told that we have to adopt, it's representative of a kind of corporate ideology. It's what's convenient for advertisers. It's what's convenient for program makers. It takes a lot of the heavy lifting out of things. And so we have to get the balance right in terms of how do we adopt what we're doing, but how do we retain aspects of what we're doing? Because before you know it, you turn around and the whole thing is just one big homogenous blob where everyone looks the same, sounds the same, is using the same slang, talking about the same stuff. Everyone thinks that just by talking about your experience, that's a concept. You know, they'll sit down and say, what's the concept for this tune? Or we're just talking about driving about in our car. No, that's not a concept. If you do it from the perspective of the car, that's a concept. If you imagine the car thinking about being driven by people and the car is making some sort of commentary about what that means, that is a concept. But you know, that kind of homogenization, that corporatization, what it seeks to do is create something that's more vapid and vacuous, where really it's about the material aspects of what's being presented and the behavioral aspects, and there's no pathos, there's no subtext, there are no themes. And so I think like we need to be kind of on guard about that as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it goes back to what Ransom was saying about authenticity. It's such an important thing, and also it's where the kind of whole conversation about hip hop's relationship with capitalism really comes up, because it's impossible to ignore that, especially from like the 90s onwards, how intertwined that relationship is and how much impact it's had on culture in general. Shaida, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say that I think, yeah, things are improving in terms of recognition of Scottish hip hop outside Scotland. But I think it can still be, or even within Scotland actually. I think it can still be like, we're still at the stage where like people are starting to get included more, but then in some ways it can be tokenistic in some areas, you know, in some places, or just inconsistent, like it's not happening again and again. It'll be like isolated, you know, features or stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about that.
And actually, just while I have you, did you find that winning the Say Award meant that people kind of started paying more attention to hip hop because it was a kind of official award? And just how was your experience generally winning that amazing award?
Yeah, it was great. It was bittersweet though, because I won during the pandemic, so there's been a lot of stuff that's not been able to happen. But yeah, I think one of the great parts about it is the diversifying theme that we're talking about is like winning that and having that title and stuff. It gave me the opportunity to do more stuff that is not just gigs, which has been, you know, extremely important because there's no gigs right now. So I think that's, you know, a very valuable thing um, that's come with winning the award. And I do think, yeah, some more artists like in these kind of genres are being included more and like getting booked more. Um, you know, for like headline shows and stuff, and then like support for them as well. Um, but yeah, also like I feel like it can be tokenistic. Like some of the festivals that have been booked for um upcoming, you know, I'm kind of like the only rapper, so it's a bit, it's still a bit rubbish, you know. It's a bit like, you know, and then that gives you like a kind of guilt. It gives me a guilty feeling almost because like, why? Oh, come on. Or what can I do about this? You know?
Yeah, I completely know what you mean. The tokenistic aspect, I know it happens across all genres and not across the arts generally, but it can be very frustrating. But I guess it's important to say that you are very talented, so don't ever think that you're, you know, you're not there because you don't deserve to be, because you definitely do. I'll come to Ransom next because I know you've spoken about this already a little bit, but I'd want to hear a bit more about how it was being part of the rap game and how this kind of came about. And, you know, did you feel like you were really like representing Scotland while you're on the show?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. For me, how the rap game came about was I had to take a minute to reflect, and it goes back to actually what Loki was saying about diversification, because before I got into rap game, I realized that I wanted to learn a lot of the elements in marketing and PR and these different elements of hip hop that are important, and that even out with hip hop is still important for any business. So I was focusing on how I could do that to build my awareness, like my brand awareness all over the world. And I found different, you know, mechanisms that I could use. I started working with businesses on building their social platforms, which gave me more and more knowledge for myself. So then I implemented all that knowledge I got, and then it got me the attention of the rap game, who then contacted me, and they were like, oh, you know, we at first they sent me an Instagram message and I thought it was a troll. I was like, who is this person telling me about a rap game or whatever? Like, and then they were like, okay, cool. We're starting this new competition called the rap game, and we want you to be a part of it. So then I was like, okay, cool, whatever. And then I gave them my number, and then they Skyped me, and then they started to do more and more like interviews. They flew me down to London. Then I was like, okay, this is going to be serious. And but still at this point, I was still wary about like, is it going to be something very cheesy? Because I'm like, I'm not trying to do X Factor. Like that's really not what I was looking to do at all. But they were like, no, it's not like people will be kicked out unless you were rubbish. So that's the only way anyone was getting kicked out, unless they really fucked up. But it was more about the case of exploring rap game. I mean, no, rap, and also one person would get like a contract at the end of it. So I was like, you know, yeah, this looks like an interesting platform that I could use to, you know, build anything that I wanted to do from there. So yeah, it was interesting, you know, getting involved with that and like being a part of that. I feel like I was able to represent as much as possible in a crazy way. Like I knew the constructs of how it was all going to work. So I'm there to represent, win or lose. And I'm not saying that I don't think I was capable of winning, but there was so much layered against me that I knew that it was not necessarily only about winning. It was about representation of who I am. And that is what my main feature on that was for. Like, and it's funny when Nova said you know, being a token kind of person, a lot of the times as a Scottish MC, you know, especially trying to break into the industry that's based down in England and then trying to build a scene up in Scotland and like try and make that UK worldwide, you often feel that like a lot of the time, even to this day, people come up to me like, oh, I didn't know black people were in Scotland. Ha ha ha. That was like a running consistent theme that I kept coming across, and it almost became a selling point because people were like, oh, what? You're a black Scottish guy. And then they'd maybe sit back and listen. They'd go, oh, that's different. And then from there, I was able to like, because obviously I've got African heritage, you know, Nigerian heritage. I could relate to a lot of the people in London who were like, "Oh, you're Niger and you're from Scotland. Hey, come on!" So then it broke down some barriers, but I also put some more up because people then looked at me in a one ticket person, even though like lyrically I could spin half of these other guys that were pretending that they were sick MCs, or lyrically, I feel like in Scotland, we're very cautious of lyrics. Like lyrics is one of the main things that we pride ourselves on. Whereas when you come down to England, because of the size of the industry and how it's growing and how it's even commercialized, it's very like image based, especially now. Like I feel like before it was a little bit more lyrical, but now it's very image based. It's all about like, okay, cool, how much money are you doing? Like, are you investing in this? Or how much did your watch cost, or XYZ? So for me, it was sick being on Rap Game. I learned, like, I met so many different people, and it kind of gave me like the validation to like approach certain people in England and do certain things like worldwide. But like it was almost like a uphill battle for representation, and that's what I always thought when I was like, okay, I'm going on this Rap Game show. It's about breaking the barriers so that like other Scottish MCs could go on it, or they could like be like, oh, like we know there's Scottish MC. We actually heard that, so we're not shocked anymore. Like now, let's just take in what these guys have to offer. So that was kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And I think you definitely did Scotland proud, and definitely in terms of encouraging other MCs Scottish MCs to get involved. I think that it was really important. And yeah, I totally feel you in terms of the representation side of things. Darren, I'm going to come to you next, because I think out of all of us, you've been in Scottish hip hop the longest, and you've experienced a lot of different releases, a lot of different people coming and going. I wonder if you could tell me a bit more about how you think Scottish hip hop has kind of grown since you started out, and if there's any specific moments or releases that you think really kind of shifted things forward.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, when we were starting to kind of congregate as a scene or a community in Glasgow around the early 2000s, there was a lot of energy, there was a lot of enthusiasm, and there was a real upsurge of creativity, because this was a brilliant time for hip hop generally. People who maybe had first got into hip hop through commercial music were starting to discover underground music. They were starting to discover idea and abilities. They were starting to discover doom. They were starting to discover rockish records, Mos Def, and a real diversity of high quality music, some of it being very street and very themed in that way, and then others being a bit more creative and artistic. And so all of these influences, I think, hit us. And what really happened for our generation was, in the absence of the more professional opportunities, in terms of more linear professional opportunities where you just make music and that's what you do, we really we became artistically competitive in a way that created new avenues in terms of the possibilities, that really started to put rap in Scotland on an equal footing to other art forms in terms of the level of creativity that was occurring. So you were finding people that were exploring subjects and topics at the same level of depth as academics, at the same level of depth as poets and musicians, but not being given that prominence and not being recognised in that same way. And I would say perhaps, obviously from my own crew, the BNMCs, I would say that we all had our own individual style, but none of us would have became what we became creatively without all of those other influences around us. I mean, that in terms of the development of hip hop in Scotland, the only indispensable era is the pioneering era, because without that, you don't get anything else. But at the same time, I think each phase, including the 2000s, which is where I made my name and where I was holding the baton pretty firmly for a few years and driving things forward culturally, as were many of my contemporaries at the time. But I think that the key feature that marks this current phase out is, as I've said, this understanding of the working together, this understanding of getting the right balance between competition and being creatively competitive, and also recognizing that in 90% of scenarios, working together with a community for a common goal is advantageous for everyone. And so I think what you're seeing through the work of Ransom or Shogun or Nova, and there's so many others, I don't like singling people out, because often people will take a resentment against me if I don't mention them. Might get a wee subliminal on a freestyle or something. But generally, that is where I really have to take my hats off and say that these guys are doing something that we never could do, that we didn't have the means to achieve, which is not just developing creatively and artistically, but developing attitudinally, developing in terms of what is the emotional and professional attitude that I'm going to take to my peers, to this as a job, not as a party. And I think that that's why you're seeing the sort of results that you're seeing. And I'm just flattered that people still want to include me in a conversation with trailblazing artists like this, you know?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right that, you know, it's really interesting to see people come up and how things have changed, but also it's so important to acknowledge the pioneers and the people that did it first, because without them, we wouldn't be here at all. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And Nova, I'll come to you next. What do you think can be done, both on like more local levels, but also industry-wide levels, to get more MCs in Scotland involved, but especially women, because I think that we could do with more women in hip hop, especially in Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, a lot of stuff that could be done. Kind of main points, I think, like if we could get like more financial literacy information to the artists, that would be cool. Especially those obviously like from more disadvantaged backgrounds and stuff like that. And yeah, maybe like more support for women in education. Like I'd love to see more like beat makers as well that are women. That would be really, really great. And I think, yeah, like more opportunities from other industry in order to do those things that are diversifying, like appearances and talks and influencer type stuff, brand partnerships, also all that kind of stuff. I think, yeah, those three things would be great.
Yeah. And Ransom, I'll come to you. Would you say that hip hop in Scotland and the UK is in a healthy place on the whole? And do you feel excited about what's happening in the genre in terms of the offshoots like grime and drill, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a healthy place. I mean, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I see the potential that it has, and I also still feel like there's elements of it that's still being neglected. And when I look at this Scottish scene, as Nova actually said, financial literacy among the artists and the peers and everyone doing things, I think would be crucial to like really push it forward, because in England, there's a lot of infrastructure that they just have because over time it's become the hub. So they have a lot of like PR companies, they've got a lot of like funding places that are willing to back rap music, as opposed to more recently, we're starting to see that in Scotland, but it's not necessarily always been a thing. In fact, I can't really think of many labels that are really backing Scottish hip hop in the same way that they do down south. So I think we're in a healthy position. There's a lot of artists that are like really coming up now. It's like, I remember there were the days when I felt like I could see, like, I actually remember low-key, I came down to a talk in 2012 with Charlie Slaughter. It could have been 2013. And you were speaking at it as well. And I was like, yeah, this guy, he knows his shit. That was funny. I remember back those days. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. There's people actually hungry and doing things, because being in Aberdeen, we didn't really see as much as that. And like, I remember when I felt like I could count the amount of rappers who were taking it seriously on, like, you know, two people's hands. If I use my hands and feet, I could count the amount of rappers. But now there's a big surge of different amount of people who are really like, okay, cool, we're trying to do this seriously, who are trying to, I guess social media is also a big factor to helping that. But I feel like, yeah, we've got the number. There's so many new artists popping up every day. A lot of people message me all the time like, oh, I've just started a new track. Can you check this out? Can you do that? And you know, we have channels and things growing. So I think it's in a great scene, but I mean, a great position, should I say. But I do believe there's still so much for the scene to achieve and accomplish, like even the use of like PR and all these different elements, which people in England are like utilizing out of their mind. Like people would think, oh, these guys are just blowing up. But really, when you're behind the scenes down here, you realize, oh, they had a company that believed in them enough to invest 10,000 in their marketing budget, and I'm like, wow. So now we need to figure out a way for the talent that we have. Let's try and get that out there. Let's try and match that in our own sense and not have to rely on what's happening down south, or will this label want, or will this agency give me money to push myself, even though they're probably going to prioritize people in London and then Manchester and then Birmingham, and then it slowly comes up north as it does, and then maybe, just maybe, if they have a little change left, they'll throw it to people in Scotland. So that's what I think we need to do. Like, we're in a healthy position, but we need to be healthier. We need to be fat and fed. That's how I see it.
Definitely. And linked to that, Darren, what would you personally like to see change and improve within the Scottish hip hop community?
I think that the points that have been made, I would agree with wholeheartedly, particularly financial literacy and also label support. I mean, I have a bigger following than some of the indie bands that have got record deals that you regularly see, you know, just being kind of parachuted into prominent places and festival circuits, and and that's just something that I've learned to accept. I mean, my whole approach to life has been born of having no resources and having to be self-sufficient and having to draw on the wisdom of people who came before me and be humble and gracious in the face of those who come after me, who still have things to teach me. And so, you know, where financial literacy feeds into this, and I speak as someone who has enjoyed a certain level of success and some of the financial spoils that come with that, and then also realizing if you don't know how to handle money, then it doesn't matter how much you've got, because money's like a kind of, it's like water. It needs to be being channeled and moved all the time, or it just sits there and stagnates and just evaporates into nothing. And so, you know, I've learned some expensive, painful lessons in these last few years, because what I was doing was I was taking money from my book sales, or taking money from my speaking gigs, or taking money from all these other things that I'm doing. And obviously when you're hot, the money's flowing in. So I'm like, cool, well, I'll just reinvest this in music. But then because my whole recording style and writing style and the whole approach to music came out of having no resources, I couldn't actually function as an artist with resources. Like, being able to buy any beat that I wanted, it just led to me having a folder with like 100 beats in it and just constantly messing about and tinkering with things and changing things. And whereas before it was like, you've got nothing, you need to keep proving yourself, get in there, get the job done. And eventually, if I actually was to look at it on paper, the amount of money that I have blown impulsively in terms of buying production or studio time when I wasn't really ready to go in, really it's indicative of the financial illiteracy which plagued me all through my life, because I come from a background where money burns a hole in your pocket, and the first thing you do when you get some is you buy everyone around you things, because you celebrate having money for a very short period of time by blowing it all. And you know, if you look around the community, if you look around, I mean, even if you look at the commercially successful artists, very few of them are able to hold on to their cash. And that always told me something, which was, even if you were able to generate a lot of income initially from a big commercial release and hitting the big time the way that we're told is possible, the financial problems continue, you know, because you just become an enterprise and everybody's taking a cut of everything and you're the last one to get paid. And this is the same principle whether you've got £50 in your pocket or whether you've got 50 grand in your pocket. So just, I think both you're spot on there. But the question is, where does that information come from? And I think actually, you know, we have a role to play in terms of disseminating that information of our experiences through our music, through our content. You know, check out what I've learned today. by this big mistake that I made by not putting half my income away for tax purposes, you know, ta-da, you know, and so we have to, it's difficult because, and finally I'll say this, I realise it's, I'm maybe talking a bit too long, but it comes down to, I think, there's a tension between trying to present yourself as a successful person and a person whose life is well managed and a person who is able to be competent in all these different areas, and this becomes your sort of image. But then at the same time, you have to be honest about your failures, what you don't know. And in order to get the information out there, we have to make ourselves vulnerable, because we might have to say, actually, I don't know everything. Actually, you know, I'm not as organized behind the scenes as the image that I present. But again, most people will learn trial and error, but I would say there are some mistakes that I hope some people will avoid that I wasn't able to avoid. And I guess that's all part of being old school.
I think it's so important to share your mistakes, though. I think that is honestly the best way that people learn. And especially in terms of people who are up and coming in hip hop right now, I feel like there's just a sense that people are maybe working together a bit more. I don't know, more, if more is the right word, but you know, it feels like people are willing to be vulnerable and share the things that are gone wrong, and that's the best way to kind of help people that are coming up, for sure. So yeah, I 100% agree with you. And we're coming kind of to the end of our chat, but because I'm nosy, I just want to know what you're all up to at the moment. So maybe start with Shayna. What have you got going on, and what are your plans kind of post lockdown and stuff?
I've been doing a lot of stuff, yeah, like there's a kind of other than gig stuff. So I just released a music video that was for a song commissioned by RBS for like a brand partnership. So yeah, I just put that out, and then I've been working on my next like proper album. But yeah, try not to rush it. So don't really know when that's going to be ready yet. But I am going to release 4 singles in the meantime from the album. So that's kind of my next main target. But I've got a video coming out soon, which is a live session at a graffiti store in Edinburgh. And yeah, that kind of relates to this because they used to do cypher events when I was a teenager, and I used to go there and like see lots of rappers perform and yeah, get drunk. So because of those memories, I wanted to go back to that place now that I'm making music and perform there. So I'm really excited for that to come out. I think I got sent the file during this panel, so I'm gonna look at the video after this. So I think yeah, those are the main things that I've been working on.
Amazing, that sounds really, really good. And Ransom, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I've got like a batch of new music that I've been working on. In fact, I feel like during the lockdown, I made so much music. It's like, it's now just sitting in a reserve of tracks. So I need to figure out exactly how I want to release it and all these different things. I'm also very passionate, as we've spoken about helping the next generation. So that's why I'm trying to get my studio in Aberdeen up and running again after COVID, because that kind of affected the way it was operating, and you know how things got with the whole pandemic. So I'm trying to get that sorted, and I'm really keen on starting a PR company, a Scotland-based PR company for artists in Scotland, to try and, because I'm obviously down in England at the moment, so I'm seeing all the different things that they're doing. I'm actually working with a PR company just to kind of get a lot of knowledge for myself, and I want to take that and implement it for the artists that I know need it the most. They'll take it to the next level. So for me, it's about formulating different businesses that I feel like I never really had coming up, especially being a young guy in Aberdeen. And I'm trying to like get that all started, as well as work on music. And I'm working with a couple of TV production companies to work on a new TV show that we're trying to bring by the end of the year. So just really full steam ahead, to be honest.
Brilliant, lots of exciting things too. How about you, Darren?
Similar to these guys, a mix of kind of music and other work. The usual for me, I'm always working on a book. I've always got something TV wise it's about to happen. But I think for me, the big challenge for me during this pandemic, obviously with young children at home, it's changed the way that I work. I've had to reassess what my attitudes are towards my level of productivity. and develop a new resilience for this low level of predictability that we have now, even as restrictions are being loosened. You know, one child gets sent home with a cough, your whole schedule's out the window. And for me, sometimes that has a knock-on effect on lots of other people. So, you know, I've had to kind of start thinking, how does a schedule work in this kind of context? How do I make sure that I'm getting an appropriate level of work done, where I'm not dropping the ball in one area at the expense of something, but also trying to always bring into the equation that while it's good to be productive and while it's good to get out there and grind and hustle and all of these things that are really part of our culture now, like, it's also important to take time to look after yourself. It's also important to take time to remember you're not a product. It's also important to remember, you know, a lot of the stuff that we see out there that we're getting messages from, it's an illusion. It's just trying to sell you on something. It's trying to create a feeling of dis-ease and discomfort in you so that you're more susceptible to marketing. And we all know that, but sometimes it really, the hardest thing to do is to set time aside, just to rest, just to chill, just to be present with other people and really pay attention to what's going on in other people's lives. And I find that of all the challenging things that I have to do throughout the course of a day is sometimes the most difficult, even though it's the simplest.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I think it's so important to take, like you said, take care of yourself. And you know, I wish all of you the best in what you guys do that's coming up. Obviously, you've got lots of exciting things. Just finally, because we are almost out of time, I'm just going to go around and ask each of you to just name one Scottish MC that you're really enjoying at the moment that you think other people that are watching this panel would also enjoy. So we'll start with you, Shahida.
I'd like to shout out K1. He's a Edinburgh rapper. I think he's like mostly drill genre. He's really cool. For one of the songs on my album, I got him to do a feature, and you know, it came out really well. And also, like, I think some of his videos are done pretty well on YouTube, you know, in terms of like attention. And also, I follow him on social media, and I've seen videos of him playing the piano, like, extremely beautifully, which is just one of those like things about it that's so unexpected, and I really like something like that about people, just something that kind of gives you an edge. So yeah, K1.
Thank you. And Ransom, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to shout out one of the young loons from Aberdeen, Just Harry. He's been grinding steadily, putting in work in the studios. So yeah, he's going to be coming with a lot of different things this year. So make sure you check him out on socials, Just Harry.
Thank you. And Darren?
I'll big up Empress. She put out her album Love Wins with Steg G, and it was a great release which really showcases a lot of things we should be paying attention to, which is it's good to have good bars, but also we need to work on our songwriting craft. And I think more than any other artist that I've heard so far, Empress manages to sort of wear our American influences on her sleeve in a way that isn't jarring to hear delivered in a Scottish accent. So she's kind of distilled her American influences. You can hear a bit of Missy Elliott in there. You can hear a bit of Nicki Minaj in there, or maybe even further back than that. But she manages to sort of integrate it into her slang and her style in a way that's still very Glasgow. And I think her songwriting is impeccable, and she give any of us a run for our money in a cypher.
Yeah, I agree. Empress is brilliant, and I think just personally, I'd like to shout out Bems, who I really enjoy, who's got some really exciting things coming up. But that is sadly all that we have time for. So first of all, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thanks so much to Darren, Shahida, and Ransom for their really great insights. I really do appreciate it, and a big thank you to the team at Hang for inviting us to take part. There's lots of great stuff happening across the programme, so do stick around and do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again. Thanks, everyone.
Good to be with you. Take care.